Hello, everybody. My name is Zach, and I'm going to be going through the Blueprint 101 or the basic training session here today. Thank you again so much for joining in. We're going to be going over some of the core features within Blueprint here, a little bit more in depth. And yeah, we'll just go ahead and get right into it here with the patient browser. So this is going to show you a listing of all the patients currently in your database here. And starting at the top, we have the location dropdown right here, where we can select to view the patients assigned specifically to a location within our clinic. If your clinic only has one location, you'll only have that option here. But if your clinic does have multiple locations, this will allow you to filter out the patients assigned to each specific location here by choosing this in that dropdown. Alternatively, we can just select all to view all of our patient database entirely here. Up above that, we have the advanced search bar here, where we can look for more patient details by more specific information, such as the patient's phone number if we want to search by that, but we can't exactly remember the patient's name. Otherwise, if we want to pull up a list of all patients that have a specific third-party payer or insurer on file, we can select that here, which will populate a list of all patients that have that entity on their profile here. We also have the quick find bar here, which will allow you to quickly search through your database that you have pulled up. So we can start by just typing the first few letters of the patient's last name, and then we'll help narrow that down real quickly to locate the patient that you're looking for. To open a patient profile, you can simply double click on the patient's name. Alternatively, you can press enter on the keyboard to also open the patient file. Or as a third option, we have the open button down at the bottom you can also use to open up their file. Now that we're inside the patient's file, you're going to see several tabs listed across the top here, which will be the navigation throughout the patient file specifically for all of the data pertaining to this patient in our system. We'll go over some of these features in this training specifically, and others will be gone over more in our intermediate and advanced trainings. But for now, we'll just do a very quick summary of each of the tabs here. So within a patient file, we have the summary tab, which we'll go over later on towards the end of this training session here, more in depth. This is going to show you a breakdown of all of the information in the patient's file. Next, we have the details tab, which will show all the demographic and the contact information relevant for the patient. It's also used to store the alternate contact for the patient if there is one as well. And again, we'll go over this a little bit more later on in the training here. We have the hearing aid tab, which is going to show any and all active devices on the patient's file. So any existing aids or devices we have sold to the patient or listed on their file will be housed here. We have the audiology tab, which will show any audiological data relevant to the patient here. The journal tab will serve as a sort of history of the patient profile itself, such as all appointments or any items that were delivered, ordered, received on the patient's file, so we can keep track of any of these applicable notes on the patient. Third-party payers, or if you're located in Canada, for example, this may still be labeled as insurers. They're both going to mean the same thing here, though. It'll be for your insurers and third-party payers on the patient's profile, where we can add in new insurers and third-party payers to the patient's profile here for billing purposes. Next, we have the marketing tab, which will show any and all marketing contacts relevant to the patient itself. And this will have a lot of information across several features within Blueprint for marketing specifically, which are gone over more in the intermediate and advanced training sections. We have sales history here, which will show a list of all of the financial data associated with this patient's profile here. And then lastly, we have the Documents tab. So any documents that are uploaded or archived in this patient's file will be stored here for later reference. So we'll be moving back a bit here. We'll go back into the patient browser. And again, looking at the list of patients here, you can see once we do select a patient's name, we'll have a snapshot of their profile showing up on the right-hand side of the screen here. This is going to show you some basic information about that patient's profile without having to open up that patient file to see that information. Listed, we'll see the patient's name, their date of birth, along with their age. We'll see their preferred telephone number or home number. We'll see their provider assigned to this patient on file, as well as the location that they are assigned to as well. And we'll see a brief preview of the account balance currently showing in the upper right here. And it'll also show a green color backdrop for $0 or credits owing on the patient's account. Alternatively, you'll see that showing as a red backdrop if there is an account balance owing on the patient's profile currently. You'll also notice that we do have these several calendar icons next to patients' names here. This indicates that the patient does have an upcoming appointment on the schedule currently. And we have a way that we can view that schedule very quickly by first left-clicking to highlight the patient's name, and then using the patient dropdown in the top left here. Using this dropdown, we can use the Find Appointments button here, and this will show any future appointments that we have on the schedule currently for this patient. We can also select them and select Show, and this will snap us directly to that appointment in the schedule itself. You'll also notice that we do have this colored backdrop here, which we call our sticky note feature. And this is going to be a great location to store information at a glance pertaining to this patient's profile. And this can be added and edited by selecting the patient's name, and then using that same patient drop down in the upper left, and selecting the Edit Note option. This will pull up your existing sticky note you have on the patient's file, but allows you to type in any additional notes and information directly to the page here. You can also color code this to your clinic's liking by selecting these options up here. And once we hit save, that will update that under the patient's profile so we can view that just by clicking on the patient's name. You'll also see we have a patient name here flagged for cash sales only. This will be highlighted with the red colored typing along with the yellow triangle. This is a feature we have in Blueprint to help flag patient profiles, and a lot of clinics like to use this for various reasons, but more so as a means just to draw more attention to this specific patient's profile for whatever reason. And this can be edited by opening up the patient's profile by double clicking. And then if we navigate to the details page, and then down towards the bottom, we have the cash sales only block. If we uncheck this, that patient's name will no longer show up in red type. But if we have this flagged in any patient's profile and then update that, it's going to show that in the patient browser with that name highlighted as such. One more thing we'll go over here is this panel on the left-hand side. We have several different options. The first three located in the upper left will be relevant to the patient name that we have selected. And we'll go over more in detail about how these buttons specifically work up here. But just note that any name that we have selected in the patient browser, we can go ahead and start an order for by selecting this button here. And vice versa, we can also create an appointment for that patient by having their name selected and clicking the appointment button. And then here we have the quick sale button in the center, which again, we'll go over the difference between the sale and the order button later on in the training here. You can also utilize these buttons while the patient's profile is opened up. So we can again start an order, a quick sale, or schedule an appointment directly from the patient's profile here. Below that, you'll see several other features across Blueprint here that you can use to access. And again, a lot of these features will be gone over more in the intermediate and the advanced training sessions. But today, we'll mostly touch on just the scheduling tab itself here. Now that we've gone over the information in the patient browser, let's move on to the actual schedule for appointments here. So we can select that tab at the top of our screen, and we can see we're brought to the schedule for our clinic currently. Taking a look at this, in the top right corner, we have another drop down here where we can select a specific clinic location. So again, if your clinic has multiple locations, we can view that schedule by each specific location if needed. Or we can view the calendar all at once for all locations for appointments we currently have scheduled. Then when you select a location here, you'll see a list of providers available to be booked at these locations with little check marks next to their name. If we want to view a specific provider's schedule and only their schedule, we can simply uncheck the other providers' names so we can view just that one provider's schedule if needed. And we can add them back in just again by checking the boxes as necessary. And you'll see we're currently sitting on the 1-day view, denoted by the 1 up in the top left here. This will show us just 1 day at a time on the schedule. If we select the 5-day view, this will show us a Monday through Friday view. And you can also notice the patient's initials showing in each column so that you can see the provider's schedule without it being too jumbled. Again, we can select the 7-day view if your clinic is open on the weekends as well, so we can view a full week at a time. And then lastly, we have the 31-day view, so we can view the entire month at a glance. Over here, we have the green forward and backward arrows, which will allow us to move forward and backward by whatever interval we have selected currently. So if I were looking at a 5-day view, and I move ahead 1 here, it's going to go to the next following week for the Monday through Friday view that we have selected here. Next to that, we'll have the refresh button, and you shouldn't really need to use this too often. It'll always give you the most up-to-date data by selecting this option, but everything in Blueprint is done in real time. So if you schedule an appointment, the doctor will be able to see that on their computer right away. If you ever get lost on the schedule here, we can use the home button, which will snap you back directly to today's date. Then we can also use the magnifying glass here, which will also allow us to search for specific appointments on our calendar. So if we need to look for a specific patient that we have booked on our calendar currently, we can type a few letters of the patient's last name here. And then select search. And this will show us any appointments we have for the patient of last name Adam, for example. And again, we can use the show button to show that appointment on the calendar here. We also have the option to print our calendar here. So if we select this printer icon, we can print out a hard copy of the day's schedule here. And this will also follow to whatever interval we have selected in our view. So if we select the 7-day view and go to print, we can print the full week schedule here as well. You also have the option to set up your calendar on your cell phones or tablet. It's going to be in a read-only mode, but allows you to see your schedule at all times. We have more information on how to connect your cellular device to Blueprint Scheduler by following the steps outlined in our user guide. Well, you can navigate to that by selecting the Help dropdown, going to User Guide, and in here we have steps to do pretty much everything inside of Blueprint that you would need help with. Otherwise, you can always reach out to us by giving us a call or submitting a support ticket, and we'd be happy to assist getting that set up with you. We also have these dotted walls across Blueprint here. And these are going to indicate movable walls, and you'll see these in several areas across Blueprint. And whenever you do, you can always click to drag and drop those walls so you can expand or compress any certain areas within Blueprint to adjust the view to your liking. The blue arrows at the end of each wall will also be used to snap those windows completely shut or opened as well. Now let's move on to actually scheduling an appointment on the calendar here. The easiest way to schedule an appointment in Blueprint is just going to be to right-click on the calendar and selecting a start time for the appointment. So within the 12 o'clock hour, we can start that appointment at 12, 12:15, 12:30, or 12:45 to begin with here. Once we select that, it's going to bring us our patient database where we can search for the patient name that we're looking to book this appointment for. But if we don't know what the patient's name is yet, or just need to get this appointment block on the schedule, we can select the None option to book an appointment not assigned or linked to a patient, and we can later link that patient to that appointment if necessary. Let's go ahead and select a patient here to book this appointment for, and then hit OK, and this will bring us to the appointment creation screen here. At this point, we can select the location that we want this appointment scheduled for. We can select the calendar that we want the patient to be scheduled under, so whatever provider the patient is going to be seeing here. You can see that the patient's name does automatically populate here. Then we can select the appointment type as well. This list will be fully maintained by your clinic, and that's all done within the setup menu. So if you need to add any appointment types to this here, you can again do that within the setup menu for the appointments. And depending on the appointment that we are scheduling, there'll be a few different boxes that will come into play here. The first one being mark busy will indicate that the provider is not available during this time of appointment. Alternatively, if we deselect this option for mark busy, this will show that the provider is available to be scheduled at the same time of this appointment. It's also worth noting that if an appointment is marked as busy, you'll see a solid color fill for that appointment on the calendar, which is denoted and shown here by all the other appointments scheduled for this provider on this specific day. But if that checkbox is not checked, we'll see a white colored fill with just the appointment type outlined around the appointment, denoting that the provider is not busy during that time. The next option we have is to mark that a companion is present. And this will be if someone is going to be bringing someone to their appointment with them. This will also be information that is calculated into a report for further reference later on. We also have the sales opportunity checkbox, which will be calculated to see a sale closing rate and calculates if this type of appointment results in a sale. Unaidable can be included as a checkbox option for AHAA members. This data can be transferred to the AHAA wake-up call, and you can contact us if you'd like to enable this feature. Then we have the option to mark this appointment as a telehealth appointment, which you can use to set up your preferred platform for the virtual appointment. And we'll also have the notes section here. If the patient does have a phone number on file, we'll see that phone number automatically populate in this note section. This patient coincidentally does not have a phone number on file, so we're seeing nothing populate in here. But we can type in any notes that we want to have about this patient's appointment here as well. So we can make any notes that we want to have available to the provider at this time. And we can make any adjustments to the date over time of the appointment by using the little black arrows here. We can also use the calendar icon to select a different day for the appointment if needed. And we can also select the start time and adjust that using these arrows as well. Alternatively, we can also view obviously all the other appointments scheduled for the provider here. And we can drag and drop the current appointment we are creating to the start time we want to have on the calendar. If we hover towards the top or bottom of the appointment here, we can also click to drag and adjust the length of that appointment on the schedule as well. Alternatively, for the length of the appointment, we can use the slider here to adjust the appointment down to the minute that we need to have it scheduled for. Or we can select the snap button to have this grab at every 15-minute interval to help make that a little bit easier for you. We also have an option here to mark the appointment as an all-day appointment, such as continuing education seminars, holidays, or PTO. We can also mark this appointment as a repeat appointment, for example, for scheduling a lunch block on a provider schedule not linked to a patient. We can create this as a recurring schedule to show on the appointment for every weekday, or we can configure that however way we want to. If we want to do it just once a week or 2 days a week, we can schedule that as we need to here. We can mark off any resources that are required for this appointment down here if needed, and this is all configured within the setup menu. And then lastly, we have the status showing at the bottom here, which will be the default status of tentative to begin with. This is typically the default for most clinics as it creates your schedule as a to-call list to see which appointments have either confirmed or not confirmed their appointments since they've been created. But if we need to make changes to that status on the appointment creation, we can go ahead and change that here if needed. Then once we're happy with that information, we can select Create Event, and that will put that event appointment onto the calendar here. Now that we have the appointment on the schedule, we can see that when we do hover over that appointment, we can see that the notes will generate down in this block down here once I hover over the appointment, so we can see any of that information that we had entered in. Across the center block over here, we'll see the patient's name and any resources that are checked out for that appointment, if any. And in the bottom right block, in the way far right corner, we'll see the patient's profile picture or their image uploaded to their file if they have one. I just don't have any uploaded for this example here, but that's where that image would be generating if they have one saved on their profile. You can also see in the bottom left, we have a year-to-date calendar here. So if you need to jump ahead far over into the future, or several months at least, we can select the arrows here to change the year that we're looking at and scroll through the various months as well. And we can click on any date here to jump directly to that date and time on our calendar. And then above that, you'll see, since we have a specific location selected here, that we have the patients in clinic monitor showing here. This is used to show the patients that we have inside the clinic currently. So once a patient arrives for their appointment, we can check them in to see how long they are waiting for their appointment time. And this will also use to calculate if a patient arrives typically early, on time, or is late for their appointments. So once the patient is ready to be seen, we can mark them as ready, and this will send a message to the provider on their computer. And they can reply to that message if they're on their way, if they need 5 minutes, they're running behind, or they can type back their own custom response, which will then show up back to you at the front office. So the next step here then would be to mark the appointment as in progress. And this again will have that timer restart to keep track of the time that the appointment is taking. And as soon as that appointment has finished, we can right click and mark it as complete, which would remove that patient from the patient in clinic monitor. All this information that is calculating during these times will be shown in the appointment analysis report to see how long these types of appointments would typically last. And again, it will also track how early or late the patients are for their appointment. And this information will all be shown in the summary tab of the patient's profile, which we'll go over a little more in depth towards the end of the training here. We can also choose to select the color by appointment type here. With this selected, it will reflect the color of the appointment type that is assigned to that appointment within the setup menu, and this is fully customizable by your clinic to color code as you'd like. Alternatively, we can deselect this, which will then revert to just showing the color of the provider for each column of the provider that we have appointments booked for. Then above that, we also have the status filter here, so we can look for specific types of appointments on our calendar. So say, for example, we're looking for all of our tentative appointments on the calendar. We'll show only the appointments with the question mark icon denoting the tentative status. You can then see if we right click and change this appointment status to confirmed. Once we've called the appointment, called the patient, and confirmed their appointment, you can see that they're removed from this view, so we can again only see the tentative appointments. Then we move it back to active, we can see that appointment on the schedule again here. We also have the option to change the status to either canceled or no-show. And once either one of those two options are selected, we're going to receive a prompt to ask if rescheduling is required for this appointment. If we select no, this appointment will be removed from view from the calendar here. But if we do select yes, it's going to keep that appointment on the calendar here with the canceled status still. And you can see that the 8 ticked up to a 9 here for the needs action panel in our scheduler. So we can open that up by clicking on this number in the red bubble, and we can see that appointment marked here with the red backdrop that we had a canceled appointment. So once we've talked to the patient and rescheduled that appointment, or considered if rescheduling is required for it, we can right click on that appointment here, go into rescheduling, and then go to reschedule that appointment, or again, mark it as not required, which would remove it from the calendar here. But if the patient were to reschedule their appointment, we can select that option, bring up this menu of the appointment creation screen, and we can change the date and time as needed to schedule that appointment again. And again, if we go to change status and cancel that appointment and mark rescheduling is not required, you can see that appointment does get removed from the calendar here. But not to fret, if that was done by mistake, we still have access to that appointment. If we change the status filter here to inactive, we can then see the appointments we have moved into the canceled status here. And if we right click, we can change that status back into tentative, which would remove it from the inactive appointments and show that schedule or that appointment back on the schedule as normal. And again, if a patient has called in and then you don't have them in your system to select from here, we can always schedule an appointment with none as the patient option, which will allow us to book a schedule or book an appointment without having a patient specifically linked to it. We can follow the same steps to create the appointment and go ahead and select create event, which will put that block on the schedule here. Then later, once we have that patient information entered into the system, we can simply right click on that appointment block here and go to the link to patient option. And here we can search for that patient profile we had created and then go ahead and link that appointment to that patient here. We can make any final changes before we go ahead and save that and go ahead and update the event to link that to the patient. And that will conclude all the information within the scheduling section here. So go on ahead into how to create a patient within Blueprint. So we're going to move back to the patient browser here. And down at the bottom of the screen, we'll have two options for add patient or add a quick add. The quick add is going to be an option that we use that will have less information required to enter to save the patient profile and can be used if you don't have all of the patient's information accessible, just to create a quick profile that you can later convert to a full patient. But it's worth noting that quick add patients will not have the full functionality that a full patient file will have within Blueprint. So it's recommended to use this option whenever applicable. So we can select the add patient button here, which will bring us to the patient creation screen. We can see several blocks that are highlighted with the blue backdrop, which will indicate a required field is needed to be filled in before continuing. So we can go ahead and start filling out some of the information here. And you can see once we fill in all of the information on the applicable lines that is required, denoted with the asterisks here, we can see that that colored backdrop will disappear, indicating that we've satisfied all of the requirements for those fields. So we can continue on entering information for the patient file here. We can enter in their date of birth, which will automatically calculate their age. We can add a social security number if we have that here. We can also assign a provider to this patient as well for their default provider on file. Here we can select any healthcare providers to add to the patient's file right away. So this will show a list of all patient healthcare providers on their file. Since there's a new patient, there are none showing here. So we can go ahead and add some to the list. And this will generate the list of all the healthcare providers within your system, which again is maintained by your clinic in the setup menu. If you don't see the provider here for the patient, we can select the Create New button to add in a new healthcare provider, then add that to the patient's profile. So we can select the healthcare provider here and then hit the OK button to add that to the patient's file. We can also add multiple onto the patient's file as well. And once we have multiple on here, we can drag and drop those providers to reorder them, which will denote the provider listed on the top as the primary provider. And once we're satisfied with this, we can select the Save option to add those healthcare providers to the patient's profile. Then we can continue on entering in the remaining required information here. And you can see once we filled in that last bit of information, the Create Patient button did highlight here, allowing us to go ahead and create that patient profile from here. Otherwise, we have some additional information that we can enter in, especially for marketing purposes, such as the patient's email address, a telephone number, that we can add in so that we can later reach out to them using the marketing feature that's covered more in the advanced training class. And again, once we're satisfied with this information here, we can select Create Patient, which will prompt us to choose a referral source for that patient here. At this point, the patient file has been created, and we receive a prompt here if we want to export with NOAA if your clinic is integrated with NOAA. If your clinic is not integrated with NOAA and wants to, our technicians can definitely do that for you. It is an additional charge of $25 per month, and it's a completely optional service. And more information about this integration will be covered in our intermediate or 201 training class. Now that we have that patient profile created, we can see they have all of these same tabs that our other patient files will have that will store all of the pertinent data for that information. So now that we have that patient profile created, let's move on into adding and selling hearing aids in Blueprint. So to add or sell a hearing aid to a patient in Blueprint, we can select their name in the patient browser, and we can use that order button across the top left to begin a new order for the patient. Alternatively, if we open up that patient profile and navigate to the hearing aids tab, we'll also, towards the bottom of the screen, see the Order New Aid button. This is going to do the same exact thing that the shopping cart order button is going to do. It's just a quick access button to do the same kind of thing without having to open up this full-fledged tab. So again, we can select the Order New Aid option, or we also have the Add Aid option. The difference between these two here is that the Add Aid option is going to be for when a patient comes into your clinic and already has existing devices that they did not purchase from your clinic, and we just want record of that device on the profile in Blueprint. Then we can select that patient existing aid, and no invoice or anything will be associated with that device on their file. Alternatively, and moving forward, you're going to want to use the Order New Aid option to order a new set of aids for the patient here. So once we select that option to start that order, you're going to see the full catalog list of items in your system. Blueprint does maintain this catalog of hearing devices, so as soon as we hear of a new line from any of the major manufacturers, we will add those into your system as soon as possible. Alternatively, if you have an aid that you're trying to sell to a patient that you do not see in this list, you can always add it in on your end by using the setup menu. And again, that's covered more in the Blueprint Advanced training course. You can also always send us a request at support@blueprintsolutions.us, and we'd be happy to look into that for you. Then here, you can see we have the quick find option that we can search for the specific model we're looking to order. We can also use the manufacturer dropdown to help filter for specific manufacturers here. And we can see the 3P payer line will automatically populate if the patient has a 3P payer or insurer on file already. If they don't have any on their profile, if it was a new profile, it would be selected to the None option here. It's also important to note that within Blueprint, when you're ordering new devices for patients, you're going to follow a simple 3-step process. What we're doing right now, it's going to be the first step, which is ordering the devices. The second step would be receiving the devices into the clinic. Then the third step and final step is going to be delivering those items to the patient, typically in the form of a fitting. So let's move through that first step and select the aids that we're looking for. So I'll type the first few letters of an aid that we're looking to order for the patient here. And select, so let's do some Audeos for this patient. Once we have the hearing device highlighted here, indicated with the pricing that we have created in the setup menu, which is maintained by the clinic, we can assign this hearing aid to the left or the right side. We can also make any changes to the prescriber and the fitter if necessary. So once I select set left here, it's going to prompt us to enter in any color and notes, which isn't required, but we can enter in any information that we need to add here. And select OK. And if we're selling a right or a second hearing aid as well, we can select the right side, and that same information will automatically populate here. Then we can move on to the next step, which would be adding any other manufacturer items to the order here. And again, this list of items is fully maintained by the clinic, and items can be added to this list, again, using the setup menu. So we can move to the third step here, which is going to be adding in any services, batteries, or accessories. And all of these items, again, will be maintained by the clinic in the setup menu as well. So if you're missing any items in any of these tabs, they can be all added in the setup menu. You can also see that we have a third-party payer selected, and we have a few different options specific to those payers here. And you can see the gold star indicating a special service that is only able to be sold when this specific insurer is selected here. And you can also see the green check mark, which will denote special pricing for this service for the selected third-party payer here. If your clinic does not deal with billing to third parties, or this is not applicable to you, this will typically just be set to the none option, and you don't need to worry about those options here. And this is all, again, configurable settings in the setup menu to make these services show up this way. If we want to add any of these services to the order, we're just going to want to double click on them in this option here, and we'll add it to the order. We can also add in a few batteries for the patient here and a pack of domes. If we add anything on accident to the order, we can use the X on the left-hand side to quickly remove that from the order as well. We can also use the quick find bar here to search the item by their CPT code if they have one added, or by the description of the name. Then we can move on to the final step here in the ordering process, which would be to make any adjustments to the actual cost of the items here for the patient. So we can see again their default pricing listing here in this column. If we need to make any special changes to the pricing, we can simply click in the price column and enter in that change as needed and press enter on the keyboard to save. It's also worth noting if we enter in any value here that is below the default pricing, such as 1,000, it's going to automatically prompt us to add in a discount so that we can keep track of this discrepancy between the default price and what we're actually selling it for here. And it will automatically add that discount in for you to give you that subtotal that you had entered. We can also make changes to the quantity of the items by selecting the up arrows here. And again, selecting enter on the keyboard to save that. On the far right-hand side, we'll see the tax column, which will be assigned a default value, again, from the setup menu. But if we need to make any changes to that, we can simply click in this box here to make the item tax exempt or taxable if needed. Up towards the top here, we can also make a change to the order date if we need to. And we can also change the provider on the order as well. And down at the bottom, you'll see the cost allocation is being automatically allocated to this third-party payer. This is a default setting for this third-party payer I have in my system, which is why the allocation has fully gone to that insurer since they are marked as paid in full. And this is again configurable in the setup menu for this third-party payer. If we need to make any changes to that allocation, we can simply select or click into the covered amount column, enter in a 0, and this will move the full amount into the patient payable. Again, if a clinic does not deal with third-party billing like this, you will not see these third-party payer lines showing up at this step. It'll just be all patient payable. This will only be showing if a third-party payer or insurer is listed in the patient's profile here. And we can split up the cost allocations as we need to by entering in those values. At this point, we have the option now to create a quote for the patient. And we can select the quote template we want to use here. And this is going to generate a quote for the patient that we can print off and provide to them here, which will show a breakdown of the items we added on the order, as well as the amounts that we had listed for those items as well. So then from here, we can choose to print that out and provide to the patient, or we can also archive it to save a copy of this on the patient's profile for a future reference. Then back in the sale itself, we can either close this out to not save this order, or we can save this order to put them on the ordered status within Blueprint itself. So if we select Save Order, it's going to prompt us if we would like to generate an order form, which we don't need to do. But if we select Yes, it'll pull up all of the manufacturer forms that we maintain for you for the major manufacturers. So for this example, we sold Phonak devices, so we have access to all of the Phonak manufacturer order forms here. So we could select a form here and click OK. This is going to then generate that manufacturer form with data automatically populated regarding the devices that we added onto the order here. And then you can then email or fax this off as you need to get that order actually placed within the respective manufacturer. Since we had saved that order, now we can see on the patient's profile that we do have both those devices on file here, also in the ordered status. And this will be completing step 1 of the ordered, received, delivered process. So the next step we're going to have, now that we have the devices successfully on order, would be receiving the items in the clinic physically. So once we receive those in the clinic, we can then locate the items in the hearing aid tab and right click, and we have 2 options here to either receive items or receive items with bill. If your clinic is integrated with QuickBooks, you can receive the items with bill, and this will send a specific vendor bill to the vendor center so that you know to pay that manufacturer. If your clinic is not integrated with QuickBooks here, you can receive the items as normal. For this example, we're going to go ahead and enter this with a bill. So this is going to automatically populate all of the items on the order itself that we are receiving. And we can select into this field here to enter in the serial numbers for the devices. Alternatively, if your clinic has a barcode scanner, you can utilize that at this step to scan those serial numbers here so that you can scan the barcodes on each of the devices as opposed to typing them out by hand. So again, we can go ahead and enter in those serial numbers here and press enter. We can also assign a battery to these items as well. And since this is receiving the item with a bill, we'll also have an option to adjust the manufacturer cost listed here. So if we need to make any adjustments to the manufacturer cost that you paid for the items, we can make those changes here so that it can be sent over properly to QuickBooks. And then at the top, the last thing we'll need to fill in is going to be the invoice number itself. And we can also make changes to the invoice date if we need to here. Lastly, we have the expense items down here. So if we have any shipping charges that the clinic is liable for, we can enter those in on the bill here under miscellaneous and enter in that shipping fee down here. And this will only be sent in that vendor bill to QuickBooks and will not show in Blueprint as patient payable. It's only going to be for the fees for the clinic here. And again, we can select Save. And this is going to move those items from the ordered status to the received status now. We can also see that in the order history here, that we have the ordered step and now received. And then the last step here is going to be the patient coming in for a fitting. So once they come in for the fitting here, we can right click on the device one more time. And we'll have 2 options actually here. It's going to be either delivering all items, which would generate the final invoice for the patient, or we can go ahead and optionally use the check item stage. Some clinics like to do a physical check of the devices before the patient's appointment. So you can use the check item option just to denote that the item has been checked. And again, this is a completely optional step and does not need to be done, but it can be used at the clinic's discretion. And again, once the items are ready to be delivered for the fitting, we can right click on the item and select Deliver All Items. This will give us one last chance to make any adjustments to the pricing for the patient here, if we need to make any adjustments to those prices. If not, we can go ahead and select the Create Invoice button down at the bottom here to generate that invoice for the patient. So we'll see that invoice being generated here with the breakdown of the cost that we had entered in that Allocate Cost stage. And at this point, we can opt to receive a patient payment to apply to this sale. If we have any credits or payments on the patient's account, they'll be showing up here to select from. Otherwise, if there's nothing, it'll show like this, and we can select to receive a new payment. This will automatically populate the patient payable amount in full, but we can make changes to this if the patient is putting down, say, a down payment here for $500. We'll select the payment method, and we can select Save then to save that payment. This will then generate an updated version of the invoice that shows the amount that went out. So we can again print a copy for this patient for their reference. Back on the patient's profile, you'll see the items have now moved into the active status and have that active tag in the history line as well. We can also see in sales history, now that the items have been delivered, we have that sale generating in sales history here, with the yellow triangle denoting an open patient balance currently. And we can see these three columns that come into play. The first column for debit is going to be treated as the patient payable portions. The credit column will show any payments or credits or returns. And the 3P total will show any third-party payer or insurer allocations. So again, if we hover over this open balance that we have here with this alert symbol, we can show the remaining balance that we have here. So since we received a $500 payment, we can see that remaining balance is now $986 for patient payable. We still have the full amount we're waiting for payment for the third party. And what we can do from here, now that we have closed out of the invoice, we need to receive a payment for this sale. We can come into sales history, right click on this sale line, and we can opt to receive payments for patient or third party. If there are no third party allocations on the sale, this will only give you one option to receive payment, which will default to be receiving as a patient payable. So again, we can choose who we're receiving this patient payment for, and select that option to again receive payment like we did earlier. We'll say they paid with a check this time, enter the check number. We can go ahead and save that. This will generate the invoice again. So again, we can provide this as a copy to the patient if needed by either emailing or printing it out. And then back on the patient's profile, we can see the yellow triangle is gone, denoting that this sale has been paid in full for the patient responsibility. And what we've gone through here is the full order, receive, and delivered process that entails for selling hearing aids to a patient. Now there is an alternative option that is quite a bit quicker, and this would be for the scenario of a patient coming in and purchasing something other than a hearing aid, such as a set of batteries that we just don't need to order, receive, and deliver. So to do that, with the patient profile open, we can use the green Quick Sale button. By selecting this option, it will bring us to an abridged version of that ordering process. You cannot sell hearing aids through this screen or order new hearing aids, but you do have the ability to sell services, batteries, and accessories in a much quicker fashion. So here again, similar to the order before, we can go ahead and double click on the items to add them to our order. And we can go and select the next arrow to move to the allocate cost page, where we can make any final adjustments to the pricing here as needed. And again, we can select the complete sale button to move that sale into sales history and generate that invoice right away for the patient. And we can see that sale is showing in the sales histories section here. So later on, we can receive payment if we're not receiving it right away. And thank you again so much for bearing with me through this here. We've just got one more section to go through before we conclude this basic training, and that's going to be just going over the summary tab in the patient's profile. So by navigating to the summary tab, again, it's going to give you a breakdown of all the pertinent information in the patient's profile here. We're going to see a breakdown of the patient's name, the date of birth, their age, the preferred or home phone number here. We'll see their provider on file, as well as the location that they currently are assigned to. If the patient has an alternate contact that is marked as a primary contact, we'll also see that patient's name and phone number here listed if there is one. We'll also see the patient balance in green if there was a $0 or a credit, and also show red if there is an owing balance. And we'll also see a breakdown for similarly for the third party as well for the patient. We'll also see the punctuality showing here, which will show green if the patient is typically on time or early to their appointment, and will show red if the patient is typically arriving late for their appointments as well. Then we also, again, have the no-show rate down at the bottom here. And this will show in red if the patient has a no-show rate currently. And in parentheses will be the number of appointments marked no-show out of a total number of scheduled appointments. Moving down a little bit further, we'll see the patient's physical address listed here, the patient's email address if they have one on file, and we'll also see any current recalls on the patient's profile if they have one here. We'll see the sticky note that we covered earlier on in the training. And then below that, a few different groupings that are color-coded depending on the type of grouping that they are. So the first three we'll see here will be colored green, indicating third-party payers or insurers on the patient's profile currently. We'll see the blue-colored labelings here as different patient groupings that the patient is a part of that are found within the marketing tab. We'll see the yellow indicating the original referral source for the patient. And then any of the red colored groupings will be different patient types that the patient is assigned to from the audiology tab specifically. Here we'll see the appointments for the patient. It will show the next upcoming appointment that the patient has on the calendar, if they have one, and then their most recent appointment that they had as well with the down arrow showing here. We'll also show the last audiogram that the patient has on file if they have one, which will indicate in a red color if it's at least 1 year old, indicating that they may need to be retested the next time that they're in. We'll also show the breakdown of the severity, the type, and the shape of the audiogram. And if we hover over this section, it'll show a breakdown of the air and bone conduction values as well. Scrolling down a little bit farther, we'll see any current aids that are on the patient's profile, with the breakdown on the left or right side, the serial numbers, as well as the manufacturer and model names. We'll see any batteries currently assigned as well. Any of the notes that we entered in for the item will also be shown in this section here. We'll see a purchase date for the items as well, which will show up in a green color if the aids are at least 4 years old or older, indicating that they may benefit from an upgraded technology. We'll also see the warranty dates, which will show in red if the warranties are expired for the warranty and the loss and damage, and the status that currently the items are in as well. And then down lastly at the bottom, we'll have the current ALDs and accessories on file for the patient here, showing the device names, serial numbers if they have any, the purchase date, their warranty expiration if they have any, as well as any notes that were entered in on those items as well. And lastly, we have the print option down at the bottom here, which if we select that, this will allow us to print out one sheet of paper that contains all of this information for that patient's profile here. And that will conclude all of the information in our Blueprint 101 or basic training session here. Thank you all so much for joining in on this with me. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us by giving us a call on our direct line, or again, using the help menu to submit a support ticket to ask us any questions you may have about any of this information. And thank you so much. Have a good one.